I'm Jeremy Vendetti, and we're here at the just downstream of the Agassiz Bridge on the Fraser River. So what we're here to look at is the gravel-bedded portion of the river. So here you can see that the valley has opened up quite substantially compared to upstream at Hope. We have a wide gravel bed alluvial channel with a floodplain on both sides of the channel. So the river morphology is here is something that we called anabranching. And so anabranching is a channel with many stable branches to it. So we have individual channels that are all conveying water, but are also very stable. Most of the largest rivers in the world are anabranching, and that they do have these many stable branches of the channel. The way that sediment moves through these types of rivers is that it typically gets eroded from one bar and then passed on down to another river bar. We often tend to think of rivers as conveyor belts of sediment, meaning that they just sort of uniformly carry sediment downstream. And that's not true, and it's particularly not true in an anabranching channel where there are many channels. So sediment eroded from the bar that I'm standing on now is not necessarily going to go straight downstream. It's more likely to go across the channel and downstream and to be deposited on another bar, usually opposite us. And with many channels, you can have the gravel being transferred from one channel to another channel downstream. There's also been a big change in the morphology of the channel. So upstream, when we were in the bedrock reach of the river, we had these narrow, very deep canyons and bedrock segments of the river. Now that we're down here in the alluvial section of the river, the channel is much, much wider. So this channel we're standing in front of is several kilometers wide, but only about 5 meters deep. So the sediment budget of the Fraser River has been established partly through measurements that were obtained just upstream here at the Agassiz Bridge. So for a period of time in the 1980s, gravel, sand, silt, and clay fluxes were measured through the Fraser River. What those observations have shown is that the amount of gravel that moves through the river here is about 400 megagrams per year. That is about 0.4 million tons of gravel moves through here every year. 5.2 million tons of sand moves past here every year. 8.5 million tons of silt moves through the channel, and about 2.7 million tons of clay moves through the channel every year. So it's important to distinguish the different components of the load that are related to those grain sizes. So rivers carry material either as something called bed material load, And that means the material is carried in contact with the bed, or it can be carried in suspension, but it is the material that makes up the bed of the river. We can contrast that against something called wash load. So wash load is sediment that is carried through a channel, but doesn't actually play any significant morphological role in the channel. So sands, silts, and clay in this part of the channel essentially move through here in suspension at high flows, and they don't really interact with the bed, meaning they don't ever really get deposited on the bed. And so the bed material load in this part of the river is gravel-sized sediment. The sands, silts, and clay are wash load sediments that get carried through here at high flow without really interacting with the bed very substantially. Now, you'll always get a little bit of sediment deposited. You'll get a little bit of sand deposited on the top of bars. You get a little bit of sand that gets trapped in the gravel, but by and large, the bed material here is gravel all the way across, and that is particularly true at high flows, where all of this finer material is just flushed right through the channel downstream. Sediment budgets provide a longer-term perspective on how sediment moves through rivers. It also provides perspective on how sediment is used to build the topography or the morphology of rivers. The sediment budget of the Fraser River here in the gravel reach was established back in the 1990s. And what it showed is that there is a pulse of gravel moving through this portion of the river that originated in the Fraser Canyon back in the late 1800s and early 1900s. That pulse of gravel came from placer mining that was happening up in that portion of the river that involved dumping a large amount of gravel into the river, which then was very quickly transferred through the Fraser Canyon and has now come down into this portion of the river and is still moving through the gravel reach as a pulse. That pulse of gravel has the effect of locally increasing the bed elevation. And when that happens, people become very concerned because they can see aggradation of gravel locally and they perceive an increase in flood risk. So this portion of the Fraser River has been mined for gravel historically, and that involves going and scalping off the top of bars, removing gravel, and then it's used as aggregate for building and is also perceived to reduce the flood risk in this part of the river. But it's important to note that by scalping the bars, by removing that gravel, there's impacts on salmon fisheries, because we have salmon using this portion of the Fraser River for spawning and rearing grounds. And so when that gravel is removed, it is affecting fish habitat. And so in this part of the river, there has been for a long time now a competition between people and fish. And unfortunately, people have been winning.